Hey everyone, welcome to the StoryBuilder podcast. I'm excited to be with Jeff Summers. Jeff, thanks for joining me.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Absolutely. And Jeff is the author of the Avery Cates series, also the new book, Five Funerals, We Are Not Good People, Lifers, Chum, and many other short stories. He does a lot of freelance hiring and is available for hire. He also plays guitar, drinks a lot of whiskey, and says he's a plague upon his house. Jeff, is all of that really true?
Every word of it is true in some sense. In some sense, I'm definitely a plague upon this house. There's no doubt about it. Yeah. If my wife wanders in, you can ask her about that, and she will absolutely double confirm that I'm a plague upon my house.
I think most writers in general are a plague upon their house.
The whiskey probably has something to do with it too, so.
Maybe. I'm always looking for stories. I can't have a normal conversation with people because I'm trying to find like new, story fodder, new story ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do the same thing. Like you're all being recorded at all times, and you never know. Like 5 years from now, I'll be sitting here and thinking about, I need a podcaster. Oh yeah, Jim. And then before you know it, you're the main character in a whole new story.
I love it. I love it. My podcasting is quite sporadic, though, I will admit. So, it's only when it's someone I actually want to talk to.
Aw.
Truly, honestly, I don't want to do that every day, every week.
Whatever. Yeah. That's the problem. Like, especially writing and podcasting, this stuff it's creative and it's fun, but then it can turn into a grind. And when it's something that you enjoy, you don't want to turn it into a grind. Even though maybe you're making a living from it, you still want to try and find a way to, keeping control of it and not turn it into a schedule that you have to stick to, and be more like, I'm doing this because I want to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it shows if you're passionate about something versus phoning it in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's almost like even a movie or something you're watching, you're like, they just showed up and they don't care.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I've definitely seen performances like that. Probably just recently, actually. Yeah,
I get that.
Why is this person in this movie?
Because they are popular somehow. From
or they have a mortgage payment to make.
Right. Now, Jeff, what are some of your favorite kind of stories that really got you into writing, or even that are like, just you look back, you're like, wow, that one changed things for me when I read this or when I watched this story?
For me, this story will show you just how dumb I really am. It all goes back to when I was a little kid, and I don't know if anybody else had to do this when you were in like grammar school. We used to take like little field trips to the library, and our teacher would take us to the library, and she'd say, you have to pick out a book, you have to read the book, you have to write a book report on it. And so the first time this happened to me, I went to the library. I forget how, I was probably 7, 8, 9 years old, something like that.
Wow.
And they were like, and I had this plan in my head. I was going to find a book on baseball or magic tricks or something like that. I figured magic tricks, I would learn how to do magic tricks, and then I would be asked to stand up in front of the class and do magic tricks. And about a week or two before that, on television, there had been an adaptation of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, right? The Chronicles of Narnia.
Yep.
It was a cartoon. And I watched it. I really loved it, really enjoyed it. But this was back in the old days. Like there was no DVRs, there was no streaming. So TV shows would come and then they'd be gone forever. You'd never see it again. And so that's how I figured I really love this show. I'm going to now proceed to forget about it because I'll never see it again.
Yeah.
And I walked in the library and there was The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And I was like, it had never occurred to me, like, wait a second, TV shows can be based on something, like there's material. And then not only was there Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, there were 6 more books. There was all these sequels. And so I started just reading that series over and over and over again. I kept taking it out of the library and bringing it back and then immediately taking it back out again. Mm-hmm. And that's what led me to start writing, because I kept reading it over and over again. And I wanted to do I wanted something new, but I was too dumb to realize that there were other books that I could go read. So I decided, all right, I'll start writing my own stories. And so I started, that's what kicked it in for me. The other seminal story that I read was actually by John Updike. It's A&P is a short story by John Updike. And Updike he's a creature of his time, and he's not somebody that I'm going to necessarily defend. I think John Updike has kind of fallen out of literary spotlight for a lot of reasons. Uh-huh. But that story really affected me because it was one of the first times I realized that you could just write about, you didn't have to write about fantasy worlds or dragons or, you know, stuff like that. You could write about just whatever, you know, you could write about working at the A&P. You could write about your friends. You could write about your, whatever was going through your head that day. Mm-hmm. And so that's what sort of, that was in college when that happened. And I was like, the first time I realized that I could just write about anything I wanted and I could make it interesting. When I was really young as a kid, I always thought that the story had to have a hook immediately of something wild and crazy that would pull people in.
Yeah.
And that story made me realize that, no, I could write about taking the bus to school, and I can make it interesting if I can find ways to do that. So those are probably like the two biggest moments in my formation as a writer.
That's fantastic. I could see how that's like such a springboard for you because of the adventure angle, the series angle, you can write about anything. I mean, you kind of have that, I don't, follow that many rules approach. So it's like the world is wide open to you. Mm-hmm. And that makes a lot of sense. Like piecing it together. That's like that makes perfect sense. That's awesome.
Yeah. And that's part of like, one of the pieces of advice that writers get all the time is that you should read, right? You should read. And that, I think that's the most fundamental advice that you can get. And not only should you read, but you should read wildly. Like, a lot of people get stuck in a channel, and it's fine. Like if you enjoy detective stories or Westerns or, romanticises or whatever, great, read them, read as many as you want, enjoy it. But when you're a writer, if you really want to get better at it and really want to like have full command over all the tools that you can have, you should be reading everything. You should read genres that you don't think you're interested in. You should read translations. Yeah. You should read old books from 300 years ago. You should read as widely as possible because everything will give you, if nothing else, it'll show you what you don't want to do. You read a book and you're like, well, that was terrible. And then, I don't have to do that. But it will also show you things you never thought you could do or should do, or you didn't think would ever work, and then you see it done and you're like, wait a second, I can do that. I can have a character and I can present them this way, or I can have this plot twist. I can actually make that work because this person did it. So reading is where it all comes from. I think, you have to steal everything that you come across, and you can't steal it if you're not reading it.
I love that. That's a great way to put it. I know you love guitar too, but I remember, I think Hendrix had a quote where he's like, I like Bach, I like Mozart. And I'm like, that's so out there where you're like, king of electric blues guitar and you're quoting classical music. And it's like, inspiration comes from everywhere. It's like, you can be inspired by like a sci-fi movie and play it on guitar. So the more you can find that inspires you and feeds your creativity, that makes perfect sense. It's like, you don't want to just be like, I stick in this one lane and you never experiment. I mean, I don't read that much romance myself because I'm like, oh, but again, it's perhaps a faulty assumption to be like, oh, they're all the same, as much as any other genres, all the same. We can always learn something. Maybe you don't like it, but what if you were to write it and you made it something that you do like, right? Yeah. So you can always have some creativity and flexibility there. That's really cool. Now, your most recent book is the 5 Funerals story. Mm-hmm. I started reading it, and it's not your typical kind of story because you can read it like from beginning to end, or you can kind of just hop around. Yeah. Can you explain this story? Because I think this is kind of in that breaking rules, bending rules kind of vibe right here. Your 5 Funerals story.
Yeah. The way that novel came to be the way it is really more about, it's a story of frustration and failure more than anything else, because it was inspired by a work by Edward Gorey, the Gashly Crumb Tinies. And Edward Gorey was an illustrator, brilliant artist, and he used to do these really amazing pencil drawings. He also did a lot of professional like marketing work that was also inspired, but he was a weirdo and in the best sense of the word. And the Gashly Crumb Tinies is a satire over those old alphabet books. Like instead of A is for apple and B is for bear, it's A is for Amy who fell down the stairs and B is for Basil devoured by bears.
Wow.
It's like it's these 26 little kids, like they're small little urchins,
wow.
And they all die in these horrible, horrible ways with this sing-songy rhyme under it.
Wow.
That's Gory's vibe. Like Gory was dark and whimsical at the same time, and he drew everything as if it was 1895. And there's always like ghosts in the background. And so it's one of my favorite things. I've got a poster of it sitting over my desk. I've had it since I was in college. I bring it with me everywhere I go, and I hang it over my desk. And I've been staring at it now for decades. And I had this thought one day of like, I'm going to bring, what would happen if I brought that story into like the real world, sort of like a more realistic, setting? How would I make that work? And I got really excited about it. And this is back 8-9 years ago. Okay. And I started working on it, and I hit a wall almost immediately, just from a structure point of view, because I have 26 kids that I have to kill in the course of this story. Whew. And it's not that they just have to die. Like, it's important that they die in the very specific way that Gory had them die, which meant a lot of like mental, like, how do I bring that into a realistic setting? Like, because there's one character, for example, who's eaten by mice, right? So how do I write a story where a character is eaten by mice? And so I tried structuring it all kinds of different ways. I tried writing it as like a detective novel where somebody was investigating all these deaths. I tried writing it where, one of the kids is the last survivor and he's trying to find out what happened. And I kept running into the same problem, which is that it ended up just being a litany of, oh, this one's dead, what happened? And then, oh, now this one's dead, what happened?
Yeah.
It got very repetitive. And I didn't want to have anybody die off page, just sort of like, I didn't want to burn through like 12 deaths in one off page.
One swoop.
Yeah. Because that kind of betrayed the whole point of it. And so I took a break at one point and I said, you know what, I'm just going to focus in on the deaths themselves. I said, let me just write stories. I'm just going to write stories. I've got 26 kids to kill. Let's go to town and have fun. And I just started writing standalone short stories where I'd be like, I take one, like, for example, T is for Titus, who flew into bits. And I thought, all right, how does that happen? Who is Titus? Why does he explode? How do we get there?
Wow.
And I just started writing these short stories. And when I got through a few of them, I thought they were pretty good. I published one story as a standalone. And then I thought, well, this is it. This is what I'm going to do. Why do I have to write a narrative? Why do I have to write from the beginning to the end and find a way to squeeze them all in? So I made all the deaths basically standalones. They're all just standalone stories. And then I wrote a framing story. And anytime a character would be mentioned, a dead character, I would just put a footnote in and say, see this story if you want to know how that.
Yeah.
And that's, once I started doing that, it all just opened up for me because I was free. I was free. I didn't have to worry about how am I going to come up with some 1,000,000-word novel that, puts all this stuff together and gives everybody equal time. You know what? Now all the stories are in an appendix in the back and you can just refer to them whenever you want. You can read them straight through. You can read them when their names come up in the middle of the framing story. So it was really, I had to fail for 5 or 6 years to write this book before it finally hit me. Okay, this is how I'm going to do it.
Wow. That's incredible. No, I love the backstory. And I think that's a brilliant use of the footnotes where you're like, hey, more.
I love
more
here.
That's great.
Footnotes. I use footnotes in a lot of my freelance writing too, the articles I write for Writer's Digest and stuff. I use a lot of footnotes. I think footnotes are really fun, and they're this great way to inject humor and be serious at the same time. Because a lot of my writing now has become this business in the front, party in the back thing, where it's in the front, it's here, I'm going to write an article about this. It's very serious, but then every footnote, it's haha, here's a joke. Yeah. So, which is a lot of fun. And again, it's very freeing because I don't have to constrain myself. I just have to sort of compartmentalize a little bit.
Is there a struggle when you're serious in the main text and then you're haha, funny humor in the footnotes? Because to me, that feels a little Jekyll and Hyde, where it's one is one and one is the other. You know what I'm saying? It's there's a two-faced line in there or something.
I think what I aim for and I hope that I achieve is that it's more of an amplitude thing where the main body of something, I'll be like Jeff at 3 you know,
Yes,
like
and you crank up
me,
to 11.
just
Yeah,
not everything has to be funny, not
that
everything,
makes sense.
you know, I don't need to be Krusty the Clown and just be like,
Yeah,
"Oh."
yeah,
But then the
yeah.
footnotes will be Jeff on 7, you know, where it's like,
That's
here
good.
are my intrusive thoughts that I'm having while I'm writing this, and now you get to read them. You know,
Who gets Jeff on 10?
no one wants to see Jeff on 10, trust me.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
I could start drinking heavily right now, and then by the end of the
Wow, I don't
podcast,
know if
we'd
we
be
want
at
to
Jeff on
record
10.
this.
I'm not looking to be canceled here today, just exactly yet.
I wouldn't publish it, but I'd probably hold it over your head and be like, "Hey, send me some, send me something cool. Let's just." That's too funny. So, all right, Five Funerals. That's your most recent novel.
Mhm.
Really interesting structure-wise. You said 5. It was 5 years of playing with it and toying with it.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, I finally cracked it.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty incredible, though, in terms of like continuing to work on it, not giving up there, not just throwing in the towel on that novel.
My experience, at least for me personally as a writer, is that happens a lot for me.
Really?
Yeah. My second novel, The Electric Church, which published
kind of a crime story.
Mm-hmm. That I started writing in 1993, and it published in 2007. And in between those years, I attempted to rewrite it probably a dozen times, because the original draft was written when I was very young, and it was very juvenile and had a lot of great ideas, but a lot of dumb stuff in there. And I kept coming back to the premise and being like, this is so good. Why can't I crack this? And I kept trying and trying and trying, and then finally got it over the hump. Another novel I wrote, Chum, which is actually the novel that my first agent signed me on. My agent signed me on Chum in 2002, and we sold that book in 2013. And in between, I rewrote that book, or at least heavily revised that book, like 5 or 6 times.
Wow.
Sometimes that's just how it happens. You know, sometimes you have a great idea, and I think it's always a mistake. Like, if you have a good idea for a story and the first draft is kind of, not great, or you lose the thread, or, you just lose energy. So, there's a million ways for a first draft to just collapse on you.
Sure.
Just because the draft collapses doesn't mean the idea wasn't good. So
execution, not the concept.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Or sometimes it's not even execution. Sometimes you just, like, I've written things that are, I think, technically perfectly fine, but that spark gets lost somewhere. Like, by the end of the book, I'm not excited to be writing it anymore, and I'm just finishing it because I have a compulsion to finish things. And you realize that somewhere in between, like, the first half is like, oh, this is exciting, this is good, and then the second half is like, no, this is a job now. That I've got to do. So sometimes you just need to go back to where you lost that and then try again. I think it's a big mistake to assume that just because your first draft sucked, that book is just something to leave behind and never go back to again.
On that very same topic, because I've experienced some of this myself, sometimes it's perfectionism.
Yeah.
Stopping you. You're like, this isn't good enough. This isn't good enough. Sometimes your gut is right. Sometimes you're like, oh, yeah, this doesn't even meet my standards. I don't want to share it with anyone else, right, for feedback or something.
Right. Yeah.
Sometimes you're just missing a few ideas. It's make the story come together. Maybe it's a plot issue or something. Do you I know you're not like a big structure guy, and not like, hey, I have a plan, here it is. But on the other hand, what about the finishing? Because if you're like stuck with a book for, several years, the reality is a lot of first-time authors or newer authors, they're just not going to finish it. They're going to leave that thing abandoned in a drawer. You're pretty, I would say, I hesitate to use the word diligent, because I know you're probably going to be pushed back on diligent, but you're clearly stubborn enough that you're like, no, this thing's coming out there. I guess that's where I'm kind of torn. It's like, feels like you're like, you grasp that story and you're like, no, I know there's enough good in here.
Right.
Is it like a tipping point? Is that what it is?
You know what? It's weird. Like I have this joke I tell people. It's only half a joke, that my parents raised me with the unreasonable confidence of a rodeo clown. Right? Somehow they
Rodeo
instilled
clown.
in me this sense of I can do anything. I'm just too lazy to do most things. Right? And really, that like deep down, I believe that. I try to control it, but it's in there. But I think it's useful because writers in writing in general, like you need to have this combination of like an artistic sensibility, but also an arrogance, right? Because you have to have some faith that you are good at this and that you have something to say deep down, no matter how nervous you are about it, no matter how hesitant you might be to show people your work, you must believe on some level that you've got something worth putting out there. And that,
sure. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And I think I just have a very outsized version of that. And I will often have like a real concrete faith that the basic idea that I've got there is good. And then I'll be realistic about how badly I fumbled every other aspect of it. But I'm always going to be like, okay, but the idea is good. A better writer than me maybe could pull this off, and maybe I could be that better writer 5 years from now or something like that.
Sure.
The other part of it, like when you talk about diligence, for me, writing is just fun. Like writing is my favorite thing to do. It's my vocation. It's my avocation. It's my wife and I get into this fight every year because when my birthday rolls around, she's like, "What do you want to do for your birthday?" And I used to say, back when I was young and stupid, I used to say, "I just want to stay home and work because that's what I want to do. That's my favorite thing." And then she wouldn't speak to me for like a week, and I finally figured out that it's not my birthday. It's really our birthday. And so I don't do that anymore. But that's the thing. Like when I have free time, I'm like, oh, I can write. I can work on something. I can write something.
Right.
And so like, it's not diligence. It's just like, that's what I want to do. And so when I have an idea,
it's your passion.
I just get excited about it, and I get in there. But I realize that's a really personal answer, and not every writer is.
No, that's great though. I think we're asking these questions, and it's okay. And we have to ask it personally and say, what drives me? What, what fits for me? Because it's not so much a blanket statement like, and I feel like as a writing coach, when I'm working with a client, that's why I kind of am like, what are your goals? What's your personality? What's your schedule? What's your energy? Like, we got to look at the big picture here before we can ever be like,
how do you calibrate that when you're working with a client? Like, because you've published like 7 or 8 novels. You have
I'm up there at 9, and it's, you got to get them to be honest. And sometimes, like, even as writers, we struggle with this, being totally honest with ourselves. But you got to get to that point of honesty. And if they're not going to be totally honest, I don't think they can answer it. And I struggle with that personally, because I'll push some. If I know somebody well, I'll push and be like, hey, how's it going? How's that book coming? Like I'm working with them as an editor really in the background too. And I'll say, hey, how's it going? What's going on? And if they're like, yeah, haven't touched it, haven't done it. And I'll be like, okay, are you scared? Are you stuck? Because I've been there. I'm sure you will too. It's like, if you're working on books, you're going to get scared. You're going to get stuck. We're all kind of in the same boat within reason, but we just have to really be honest. And it's harder if it's first time author, because there's a lot to be scared about. You're like, is my Aunt Judy going to judge me? All the many things, right? Am I going to get fired? Is everyone going to hate me? All those things. You got to work through some of that too. But
is my friend going to figure out that I based a character on them and they're never going to speak to me again or something like that? Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. And I'm going to transition on that, because I think that's one of the awesome things you mentioned in your book, Writing Without Rules. Highly recommend. This is a lot of fun. A breath of fresh air for writers. Basing characters off of real people. I do it too. I think there's something more real about it. And I think it's frankly a shortcut that is worth sharing, because if you don't know what your character looks like, sounds like, dislikes, personally, I even say most characters have a vice. That's one of my core things that works for me. It's like every character has a vice. I don't care if it's they drink too much iced tea, whatever. They all have a vice. I didn't say Long Island iced tea. I just said iced tea in general. Like, you know, some people might chew a toothpick, some people might go gambling, whatever.
Yeah.
I think there's a shortcut there, Jeff, and I think you're dead on, because it's like, if I don't cast my characters well, and I'm like, oh, well, it's a bad guy thug, whatever, you know, it's a random henchman, you know, something's missing unless I'm literally, you know what I mean? You have to cast them and say, oh, well, it's like this person here that I know, or it's, you know, having it based on something, because otherwise it's like you're missing physical attributes. If they talk, how they view the world. There's just so much in that. So how did you kind of piece this one together and apply it in your writing more?
This is one of those moments. I actually had a moment where I was realizing that a lot of my characters were either just me, you know,
totally,
which is fine. But, you know, like a lot of my characters were me. And the characters that weren't me were kind of weightless. You know, they were kind of just there, even though I would try really hard to describe them and give them physical, you know, attributes. And as you say, like bits of business, you know, like quirks and stuff like that. But then that was it. Like they were just quirks running around, you know? And I purposely, when I mentioned earlier, like when I realized that you could write stories about anything, you know, they didn't have to be crazy. You could just write about real life. That's when it kind of clicked for me, because I started writing stories just about my life at the time, which wasn't terribly exciting. I wasn't doing anything interesting, really. I was just living. But I would write stories about what I did that weekend, and they would always be stylized and dramatized. You know, I would always like pump up the drama and introduce things that didn't actually happen and all that. But I found myself just sort of mapping the characters onto the people I was interacting with. And to your point, what I found was it kind of anchored them in my head. And as I wrote them, they deviated further and further from the person, the real person. They became characters in the true sense.
Right.
But because of physically, I could pull on mannerisms and tics and things like that, like the way they dressed or the way they moved or the way they made me feel. Like, you know, whether it was somebody who intimidated me or somebody that I really liked and wanted to spend more time with, and I found weirdly compelling, you know, I could pull on that. No matter how weird the character got in the story, I always had that to sort of anchor me. It's like on that show Lost, you know, where they would talk about having a constant, right? You need a constant to be able to stay sane when you're time traveling. You know, that's sort of the same thing. I needed a constant to always be able to return to a harbor and be like, okay, wait, let me reset. This is that character. This is what they would do in this situation. And it really just opened everything up for me. And I think the last thing I'd say about this is that a lot of younger writers are worried when I tell them this. They worry that they're going to be recognized. Like, you know, if I base a character on my brother or my friend or my teacher, when the book comes out and I'm famous and I'm Stephen King, they're going to read that and be like, wait a second, this character, this awful character that kills everybody, that's me. And they'll be pissed off. And I guarantee you they won't, because I have literally shown like stories that are all about a person to the person, and they read it and they're like, this is nice. Thanks. You know, and they have no idea, because if you do your job as a writer, you're layering on so much stuff on there that people are never going to recognize themselves. And also nobody sees themselves the way other people see them. So
it's true.
I'm shocked to find out that this character was based on them.
Power perspective there.
Yeah.
If you're going to borrow, I guess is the nice way to put it. If you're going to borrow from someone in real life that you know or don't know, maybe it's an actor, you know, or somebody you've seen in a movie. Don't use the same names. Yes. Personally, I have no problem borrowing middle names, because usually that's, or, you know, do the combo thing. You like you like somebody else's first name and give it another last name. it's like peanut butter and jelly, you know, peanut butter and jelly, boom. Change their hair color.
Yeah. Change
the facial hair. There's so many little tweaks. It's like, it's unreal. It's like, it's just.
And you don't have to wholesale steal the entire person or a character they play. You can steal bits of them. Like I once was writing a story, and I wanted the character to have a very distinctive way of speaking, and I couldn't land on where to go with it. And I ended up, in my head, as I was writing it, they were speaking in William Shatner's voice, like doing a really bad William Shatner impersonation, like this is the way to go, like that sort of delivery that he does in his worst kind of hammiest performances.
Sure.
And I didn't call it out, and the character wasn't really based on William Shatner. He wasn't supposed to look like William Shatner or be it, but I stole the delivery, kind of like the rhythm of his speech. And you'd never know. Like, you read the story, it's not going to jump out at you. But it really helped me sort of be like, this is how this person talks. They have a slightly overdramatic way. They do these weird pauses. And so as I was writing, it was really easy for me to just imagine a little tiny William Shatner on my shoulder reciting the dialogue in my ear. And I just like, oh, okay, he pauses here. He does a weird thing here, and it worked out great. No one will ever know. Like, it'll never come up because no one will ever be like, oh yeah, William Shatner. I see that.
That's hilarious. I bet the little William Shatner had something to do with some of the whiskey too.
You all can see him, right? It's not just me, right? Wait a second. This is over. This podcast is over.
It was fun anyway. Hey, man. So you kind of mentioned in your book that you don't necessarily consider yourself a plotter or a pantser. The two extremes being one that outlines a lot, the pantser being one that kind of literally makes everything up by the seat of your pants. You're kind of that middle ground of, I think it's plantser, Plantser. How did you figure this out? Was it kind of that trial and error? Hey, I'm piecing this together and I'm in the middle.
Yeah, it all comes back to, like, the title of the book is Writing Without Rules. And so many of the rules that writers work by are self-imposed in a weird way. Like,
Sure.
And when it comes to plotting and pantsing, one of the early conferences I went to for Writer's Digest, I think I took a poll. I was like, all right, who here is a plotter? And, like, people raised their hand. Who here is a pantser?
Yeah.
And it's like, but why? Why do you think of yourself so rigidly that way?
Yeah.
And I was guilty of that too. When I was younger, I was a pantser. It's like, I disdained planning stuff because I really valued spontaneity, and I enjoyed writing as if I'm a reader. Like, I enjoyed writing and being just as surprised as you are. Like, when and then he exploded, like, wow, I did not see that coming.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that. But as I got a little older and worked a little bit more, I realized that sometimes it was not serving me well to be so rigid about that. And I would look back and be like, okay, here's a story. I love what I've got so far. I can't bridge the gap. I know where I'm going to be. I knew the ending. I knew the beginning. Loved the beginning. I thought it was like, this is going to be great. And then I would hit this like novella part, where like I was like 30,000 words or so, and I just could not figure out how to get over the chasm to the next part of the story.
Yep.
And I kept writing and writing, kept trying to write my way out of it, like constantly just writing and then deleting and then writing and deleting. And one day, out of frustration, I just sat down and I just started to map it out. And that's what got me through, because I was able to say, like, okay, what if I did this? No, that doesn't work. What if I did this? No. All right, if I do this, then this is going to happen, and whatever. I started to flow chart it out a little bit. And it took a little while, but I eventually got to a point where it's like, okay, I can see the path forward. And then I went back to pantsing again. Like, I knew generally where I was going. Yeah. So then I was like, okay, fine. I'm going to start just doing it again.
Yeah.
And I realized that you can just turn this stuff on and off anytime. You can do whatever you want, Yeah. You can pants or plot anytime you feel like it, and switch back and forth. You can write short stories for a while and then piece them together into a novel. You can decide one day, you know what, I'm going to get some fancy piece of software. And, I've always just worked on like a bare bone word processor, but today I'm going to go out and I'm going to get, some fancy thing that's going to help me with all this other stuff, and try it. Why not? Why not, we do this in life in so many ways. We decide that we are one thing, and then that's just part of our personality. And we refuse to ever consider that we could do it a different way, because it feels like we're betraying ourselves in some weird way.
Yeah, no, I'm with you.
And it's not. It's evolution. It's learning, or it's learning. Maybe this works for you, and maybe it doesn't. But knowing it doesn't work for you is just as valuable.
I think that's a great point. And I I'm a former accountant of all things, and I was a bad accountant. I wanted to work for the FBI. That's like my own personal story. I wanted to work, like I could do the research and piece stuff together, and I wanted to catch the bad guys. But 99% of my accounting was like, you know, literally spreadsheets, whatever. Yeah. And I'm just like, and I didn't dig it. I didn't dig it. Shocker, right?
Yeah.
And then I realized I enjoyed writing, and I found a story that I'd written, and I was like, but I'm not a writer. I'm an accountant. I hate accounting. I don't want it to be my identity, but it's all I knew. And I think there's something there where it's like, it's what you know, it's what's familiar, even if it's uncomfortable. Again, it's familiar. So when I was getting into writing, and this is about 14, 15 years ago, when I was getting into it, I was like, but I'm not a writer. I don't have a pipe. I don't have a sweater vest. I don't have a typewriter. I don't, I literally was making these, I don't go to cabins and write and all this stupid, like, pictures in my head and thoughts. I was like, no, I can't do that. No, I don't even have glasses. I don't know what I'm doing. And it was just so dumb to say it out loud now. It's like, but it was almost an identity crisis in a way. And I'm like looking around going, I'm not like this guy. I'm not like that guy. But the point is, I think we do that with our habits and routines, whether it's with your job or whatever. You say, oh, well, this is what I do. And you take some comfort in that.
Right.
And it's familiar. And we just say, oh, well, I don't use this app. I don't use this app. And it's like, well, what's it doing for you? Is it working? No. Okay, maybe it's time to try something different, right? And eventually we figured that out, Jeff. It just takes a little time, a little more trial and error, and kind of roll with it. I want to mention your series again, though. You mentioned The Electric Church was your first book. New York City hitman goes to eliminate a cult leader. I love concept. I'm totally going to read this book now. It's absolutely my to be read pile. You wrote a lot in this series. You've written 5 novels in this series specifically. I believe there's even more.
Yeah.
Because is that a spin-off of short stories, like 5 more books that you had?
It was a weird experiment. Because I wrote the 5 books were published by Orbit Books, and that was a whole series. It was exactly what I wanted to do, and I thought I was done with that character. Sure. But then I started to have ideas, and I didn't want to write an entire novel, so I started writing like short stories about this character, and then linking them together. And then when I had a mass of stories that composed like one whole arc, I just put it out there as a book, and self-published it as a book, just because I was having fun. It was mostly about experimenting a little bit and having some fun with it.
That's awesome. That's so fun. And you're just like, hey, there's more to be said. Let's fill in the gaps, essentially, and add on.
I thought I had finished the story because that was when I sold those books to the publisher. I had a very clear idea of like where I wanted to go and where I was going to end, and I got there, and I was like, oh, this is great. I'm proud of this, and I walked away, and I thought I'll probably never write about this guy again. And then like 3 years later, I was sitting here and I had this idea, and I couldn't get rid of it. It was one of those things. It was like this pebble in my brain. And I'm like, oh, what about this? What about this? And so I was like, all right, I'll just write a story real quick. I wrote 9,000 words, real quick story, just to exercise it out of me. And that just led to another idea. Like, oh, well, what if this happened next? And this was an interesting thing you put in there. Why don't we find out what that's about? And so I wrote another short story, and then another. And then before I knew it, I was like, okay, I've got 50,000 words of short stories. If I write a few more, I've got a whole thing.
Yeah.
And what was great about that too is that I wasn't working on a schedule. I wasn't, no one was necessarily waiting for these things because I hadn't made no announcement. I hadn't told anybody like I'm doing this. So I could just do it whenever I felt like it. And then when it was all done, I just put it out there.
That's awesome.
Like, anyone who's interested, like if you're a fan of this series, here's a new one. That was just a lot of fun.
That's really cool. What was it like doing that series overall? The first 5 novels, you're like, I'm a little blown away because I'm working on my 5th Western. And you've got 5 novels in this crime series. And I'm like, my brain thinks trilogy is why I'm asking specifically. My brain likes to go, trilogy makes sense. It's clean. I can think probably Star Wars in my brain a little bit. It's trilogies. What was it like for your first 5 novels with this series?
What's interesting about that is that I used to think in terms of trilogies too, because growing up, like once I got past the Narnia books, it was like the Lord of the Rings and Chronicles of Thomas Covenant, all these big epic fantasies.
Indy was the trilogy for years that we kind of looked at it and was like, hey, this works as a trilogy.
Right, exactly. And I used to think about that. So actually, when I sold The Electric Church as just as one book originally, like when I sold the 2 Orbit books, it was just one book deal. And I actually wrote the first book was originally written as a standalone. Like the ending had a weird kind of hook for a sequel, but in my head, I didn't intend that. In my head, it was sort of like just to give the reader this thought that the story continues on, but I'm never actually going to write that. But then the publisher came and said, would you write sequels? And, we'll pay you to write sequels. And I was like, oh, pay me, you say. And so I said, all right, I would be excited to do that.
That's awesome.
So I sketched out 2 more sequels, and I had a very specific idea because the whole thing is set in this dystopian, crumbling world. Like everything's falling apart. It's this crapsack world. Law and order is dissolving. Resources are drying up. Everything's going bad, and the assassin character, Avery Cates, he gets hired to kill this cult leader, whose cult is basically taking over. Like everybody is being subsumed into this cult, and he's hired by the government basically to take this guy out.
Wow, this is great. I love that hook. It's so good.
Well, because that's the thing. As it turns out, the cult, the reason it's spreading so fast is that it's forcibly pulling people into the cult, because the cult is all about, they have these cyborg bodies, and they will implant your brain into the cyborg body because a normal human lifespan isn't long enough to atone for your sins. Like you can't pray enough in 90 years to make it into heaven. So you need eternity. So you need to be in a cyborg body, and then you can just work on your soul forever. And that's the only way you're going to do it. But then it turns out they're actually just murdering people and stuffing their brains into these cyborgs.
Wow.
So the first book was like, I thought, okay, the first book is religion. It's the fall of religion. The biggest religion in the world gets destroyed at the end of that book. And so then I thought, okay, the second part will be the fall of the government. And then the third part will be the fall of like just humanity itself. And I thought, very clean idea.
Yeah, I'm with you.
And I wrote an entire sequel, book 2, just like feverishly. I was so excited. And I wrote this book, showed it to my editor at the publisher, and she was like, not my tempo, like in that movie with the drumming, right? And the drum teacher's always like, not my tempo. And my editor was like, not quite what we were thinking of for this. And she had some really great, horrifying, terrible criticisms. Like she sent me this very long memo, and she was like, this is why this doesn't work. And she was right. Like she pointed out that the plot was very similar. Like I'd sort of just replicated the general
government for religion. Yeah.
She was like, you're not expanding the universe. You're not giving us anything new. You're just sort of circling back to the same things that you did the first, like all this smart, painful criticism.
It didn't get bigger. Yeah.
Right. And she said, we love the first book and we still want to move forward, but you got to rethink this. And so I took a step back and I plotted out 2 more books then that were less final, like less like this. These are the next 2 stories and it's over. It was more like, here's just 2 more stories. Here's 2 more adventures that this character has. But in the background, like all that stuff about the crumbling of the universe and everything falling apart was still happening.
Yeah.
And those came out. That was book 2 and book 3. Those were really successful. Everybody liked those. And so the publisher came back again and said, like, you got 2 more in you. And it was like, pay me, you say. And so 2 more books. And this time, having learned that lesson, I tried to be a little bit more thoughtful about, yes, I want to accomplish these things. I want this part of the world to fall apart. I want this to happen. I want to end up in this place at the very end. But at the same time, I want to tell fresh stories and expand the universe and give the reader something brand new to chew on. And then, so that all worked out. So this was a big lesson for me. This really was an education for me about, it's not always, the second book I originally wrote was really self-indulgent, and it was fun, but it was fun because it was kind of easy. It was kind of like, I'm just doing the same thing again.
Yeah.
And it taught me to really always think about challenging yourself. Always think about where can you stretch a little bit. It's great to have this overall plan, but how do you give people something fresh and new each time?
That's awesome. I'm so glad I asked for that specifically, because that's such a big one where you want to stretch and grow, try new things, not just keep reinventing the wheel over and over. Otherwise, we do become a bit of a rubber stamper as a writer, just like a widget maker. It's just like the same process, same over and over, versus growing and trying new things. And I really like, that's really good, because I think it's weird as a writer, because I see some folks doing that, the widget making, and they're really successful, and I'm kind of going, and that's cool for them, but I don't think most of us want to do that. I think most of us want to keep growing and trying new things, and stretching and failing. And I mean, if everything's exactly the same, it's not really
it becomes content at that point, right? It's not art anymore, in a way. But at the same time, there are different types of readers too. Some writers do write basically the same story over and over again. They just swap out some elements and stuff, and they do very well. To your point, they sell a lot of copies. But some readers, that's what they want. And it's the same thing, like sometimes on like a Thursday night, late at night, my wife and I will flop down on the couch and we'll watch House Hunters, right?
Yeah, what's going to happen.
It's exactly the same every single time, but that's what we want. And there's no shame in that. Like, we enjoy it. It scratches an itch, and we get into it. Same thing with like police procedurals or
SVU or something like that. Yeah.
Romances too. There's nothing wrong with, you love these elements of a story and you want those elements over and over again. Like, there's a reason right now a lot of publishers are starting to market using tropes. Like, they will literally put in the marketing copy on Amazon, like, this is an enemies to lover thriller with serial killer in the background, and they'll literally list the TV tropes that they're including in the story, because they know people want that. And there's nothing wrong with that. You should be able to enjoy a repetition of a pleasurable experience over and over again. Hopefully, once in a blue moon, you'll stretch a little bit as a reader and read something different.
Right.
For you and I, it's a little different, because we are creators, we're artists, and
we're seeing this stuff on a daily basis, making it up. So.
Right. And we want to stretch. We want to do something different. But I also ask myself sometimes, like, if the Avery Cates books, they sold perfectly respectably, they were fine. But what if they had become a Song of Ice and Fire? What if they had become like a James Patterson kind of thing, where 1 million copies sold?
Yeah.
And the publisher kept coming back and saying, can you do that again? Pretty much exactly the same. Would I really say no? Would I be like, no, I don't want to retire young. I don't want to be swimming in movie options and stuff. I don't know. I mean, I might fool myself and say, you know what, I can write 3 books a year and then still work on something great and interesting on the side. So I'm not trying to throw shade on anybody. I mean,
I get it. I totally get it. That'd be a bad, interesting problem for sure.
It'd be a good problem.
Probably we just brought in new characters, which then spices it up, and spin-offs, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and some, like, it depends on how you're going to define this, right? Because like Elmore Leonard wrote similar novels every single time. Similar character, types, archetypes and stuff every single book. And yet they weren't, carbon copies of each other. They all had a distinct flavor and a distinct kind of bounce to them. So there's levels to this. It's not black and white.
Yes, that's a great point. Any final words for other writers, especially those who are, they've started writing something and they're not sure about it? I feel like so many authors or future authors are in that boat where it's like, I got something, I got an idea. Maybe it's a short story or a novel idea. And they're kind of in that limbo. I feel like it's a very common place for them to be. Like, any words of advice that you give to someone in that boat?
I think you have to sort of let go of preconceived notions of what your story is going to be, right? Because now I'm saying this as sort of like, as we discussed, I'm kind of a pantser. So for me, I don't plan things out and I just start writing. And so sometimes I'm very surprised. I'll end up with a short story and then that's it. It putters out and there's nothing else there. Sometimes 3 years later, I got tens of thousands of words and I'm like, this is the greatest book I've ever written. You never know. And so I think the key thing is to just write, just especially if you're starting out, just write. Just see where it goes.
Yeah.
And if you don't finish it, don't worry about it. Put it aside, reuse the material, maybe try again, or start something brand new and then come back to it a year later. There are no rules. I mean, I feel
other than keep writing, right? That's really the only thing. Keep writing.
Just keep writing. And again, I'm going to reiterate, keep reading. Because if you're struggling to finish, or if you're struggling for ideas or confidence, reading a lot will help you tremendously, because you'll see how other people do it. You'll see how they pull off tricks. You'll see how they, took ideas and developed them, and you'll absorb that stuff almost subconsciously, and it will help you tremendously.
I love it. Thank you so much, Jeff. And we're going to link to your website. That's probably the best place you'd recommend most viewers and listeners go to. It's jeffreysummers.com. I'm going to link to that there. His newest novel is, again, that 5 Funerals. And that's on Amazon, as well as Barnes & Noble, Apple, all the places.
Everywhere fine books are sold.
Yes. And I can't recommend your nonfiction book as well enough. That book is currently on Amazon and eBay, and I might even give away a copy of it. If someone hits me up, I might be buying another one just to share. If they ask me, I might just share it, because I was sharing that with my writers group. I think your book is such a fun adventure there. But yeah, thank you so much, Jeff. I really appreciate this.
Thank you for having me. This was fantastic. I had such a great time. Thank you so much. And one last thing I'd say is, anybody who goes to my website, feel free to contact me. My email's up there. I answer questions constantly. I'm happy to have a conversation.
I love it.